Welcome back. Welcome to another edition of Nain's Shorts. I'm just bringing up some information about the seminar that we've been talking about recently. Cesar Johnny Oliva is teaching for 4 hours on March 16th in Brentwood at Twin Tiger Self-Defense Academy. And I'm sorry, Twin Tigers Academy of Self Defense. I went dyslexic on that one for a little bit, but it is a great cause. The proceeds are going to go to a young man by the name of Sean. It's actually Master Mike O'Leary's son who needs a transplant, needs a new liver, from what I understand. I don't know the full details on what's going on, but that is what the seminar is focused on, or at least the proceeds are. The focus is still training. It's going to be 4 hours, I believe, from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. It's only $40, so if you can, please come to this event. Again, March 16th. It's a Sunday in Brentwood. Cesar Johnny Oliva, I've been to several of his seminars. He's an incredible teacher. He likes to have fun, but he's also very focused on what he's teaching. He's just a well of knowledge. So definitely, if you can, please. Otherwise, we'll add details, donations, that sort of thing to help out as best we can. But keep that in mind. It's coming. We talk about training. Training is the focus. And a lot of what we convey comes down to language, communication. And I'm not talking in the sense of, English versus a different one. Is what is it that you're trying to get across? What do you want the person in front of you to understand? And I think it's something that we should really work on, or at least it's something that my teacher has me working on a lot, is the language that you use to get your point across. Well, first of all, what is your point? What are you trying to convey when you're teaching something? Is it just to learn the movements? Is it the nuances behind the movements? Is it being able to adaptively change what you just learned to something that's going to better fit your movement, your person, how you go about achieving success with whatever it is that you learn? Because if it was just about the art, then everyone that practices a certain art would be amazing at it, would be spectacular. But there's more to than just the art. The practitioner has a lot to do with that. Sorry, folks, I haven't had my morning coffee yet. But that all depends on what they understood. Now, talent aside, because there are some people that are just phenomenally talented. They see something and automatically already have a good understanding on how to go ahead and perform that move, that technique, because they're just that athletic. I'm not one of those people. And those who have trained with me, they know by now that I'm not one of those people. I'm one of the people that I had to keep working on it, and I got it wrong 90% of the time. The information that was given to me, I thought I understood it, but I didn't. So I did it the way I thought I understood. I trained, I worked, I blistered my hands, and then realized I was going in the wrong direction the whole time. So for me, language has become a very important tool, not just for my personal learning, but also how do I then get those lessons across to the students. It's not easy, folks. I'm not saying that this is one of those things that everyone can do, and just because a lot of people can, it doesn't necessarily mean we can do it well. So it's a constant development. But that's what training is. That's why we train on a regular basis, because it is a constant development that you have to keep going. It's not one of those things that, I'm really good at it, I can move on to something else. I got my black belt so I can move on to something else. No, it is a continuation, and depending on the amount of time you put into it, that's what you're going to get back. Of course, it's a simple idea, but that in itself is something that should be widely known, that a lot of us have heard over time, but how many of us actually implement that concept? The amount of effort you put into something is what you get in return. And at the same time, you could argue that just because you put a lot of time into it doesn't necessarily mean you get a lot of return, because what did you put that time into? Was it to understand really everything that's behind the lesson? Have you taken the things that you know and truly understood everything that there could be to understand within that lesson? Even your most basic moves, techniques, and ideas. Like, for example, recently we talked about counters in our class and how they develop, and what they're useful for and when to use them more than anything. And a lot of our students were already doing that. They were able to adapt to that idea very quickly. You know, you counter. Somebody does this, you counter. You take care of the weapon hand, you take care of the threat, and you move on to the next thing, and you do your moves after the fact. And it's been brought to my attention that, isn't that a punch art? Like, I also do Kaji Kempo, whatever art you do, isn't that one of your moves? Somebody throws a punch, you do a series of movement. Isn't that technically a counter? Because they threw a punch at you, they attacked you first, you took care of the threat, and then you did X amount of things afterwards to then attack the person throwing that punch or throwing that attack. That's a counter, but I've realized that many times we don't refer to it as a counter. At least not right away. And maybe sometimes we never actually go back and say, oh, this punch art or these 20 some odd punch arts, they're all counters. Now, is it because we feel that it's such an obvious thing that we never say it? Because obviously I'm dumb enough not to know that, or not to have seen it that way. It's a punch art. It's a separate thing. And maybe that's why we fall short of truly understanding it, is because in our minds it's this one thing and nothing else. And we don't think of the other ideas that could go behind it. Like, I do this punch art and I take care of the punch, and then I hit the person, and that's it. That's supposed to end the fight. But again, isn't that a counter? I didn't start considering the concept of counters until we started sparring more. Now it's like, oh, they throw a punch, you counter that punch. But wait, holy crap, that is a punch art. That is a grab art. Somebody is doing something and you're doing something against it. That is, I believe, the definition of counter. Now, it's not the textbook definition, and it's not the dictionary definition of a counter, but you can see where I'm going with this in the concept of it. But why wasn't it said? Why wasn't it presented that way? Now, there could be various reasons behind that. Like, for us, we want to teach the concepts and ideas to our students and get them to move by explaining why we're doing it for that moment. Today, this is a drill. This is an exercise. This is what you're trying to develop in this exercise. Okay, now you take that same drill, that same exercise, and now you adapt another concept. Oh, you're trying to learn the speed behind things. Today we're learning on how to move around an object using what you already know, using everything that you've been working on so far. Okay, now all of a sudden you change the verbiage. It's something they've been doing already physically, but mentally it hasn't been brought up until we use certain key phrases. This particular time, the word was counter. You are countering somebody's attack. And because they've already been doing it to a certain degree, but not focused on the verbiage, the actual definition behind it, because again, you can use different verbiage and different definitions depending on what lesson you have for that particular person or that particular class. But all of a sudden it takes on a whole different meaning, which got me to think, where other instances in teaching and in learning do we either limit ourselves, limit our students from getting a better grasp of something because we fail to use the verbiage, or we think because it's so obvious we don't say it? How much of the information that we realize years down the line when we've been training, where we go back to the basic stuff, where we already have all this knowledge from all these other people, and we're like, holy crap, I never realized this was already there in our most basic movements, in our basic forms, because we just didn't take the time to realize that that's what was going on. We didn't take the time to realize or give the effort forward that we are already doing these things, but we didn't think about it that way. And we didn't do anything about it to actually understand it. But later on, years later, we get it, and all of a sudden, oh my God, this becomes a very important lesson. Something that should have been said from the very beginning, but we failed to because we ourselves didn't understand it. So, what other instances in our lives can we say that we understood something, but only to the base level because we just didn't take the time to look beyond what was given to us? And then do we continue that process by just giving our students the face value stuff without actually adding the things that we think are obvious, but we're just not saying, simply because they are so obvious? And if we start saying the obvious things, we start going into the ideas that it develops later on. Can we bring our students further along? Does it really help us develop our arts even more so, our practices, beyond what we were originally given, beyond the level that we think we are in? Because a lot of this stuff is really just what we understand. And what we understood at the beginning is nowhere near what we understand now. But what changed? Is it really the knowledge, or is it because somebody said something that was there the whole time, but because they weren't our teacher, but because they have a higher status, but because, whatever the reason we now listen to this person or listen to the information, it makes more sense. Do we really have to go through years and years of grinding and working and well, injuries many times before we are able to fully understand what was being said at the beginning? Is that part of the process, or can we just start being honest about it and realizing, what, that was never said that way, that wasn't introduced to me until later on, and now that I see it, how can I now alter, how can I add this to my teachings, to the students that I'm bringing up, so they can understand it sooner, so they can see it before they get too far along, so they can correct it, and not only correct it, but start using it right away. Now, don't get me wrong, some people, some students are too young or too new, so definitely wouldn't be the right time to say that. But once they get to a certain point, once we get enough under their belt, under their understanding, that we can start branching out, why not say the things that are so obvious and help them grow? When and where, well, that's a whole different topic altogether. But what are some of the things that you now know to be completely true and very helpful to your training, to your art, to your teachings, that were there the whole time, but it took you a while to finally get? It took you a while to finally see, oh, yeah, no, that was there from the beginning. I just failed to see it. Or can we admit that maybe our instructor failed to mention it because they thought it was such an obvious thing that no one could misunderstand it or miss it completely from the conversation, from the teachings? So language becoming a very important process in learning and in teaching. And what is it that we're saying when we talk about this stuff? Do we separate things completely? And if we do, are we doing it on purpose, or are we doing it because we just haven't thought of a different way? This is one thing, this is another thing, and this is another thing. And it's not until we get to the third topic that we start using things like counter, like trapping, baiting, all these things that we use for the context of sparring versus a punch art versus a kata? And can those concepts be seen within these other ideas? And if so, are we talking about it? Are we mentioning them? Are we showing them and proving that they've been there the whole time? We just haven't had the conversation about it. So, how important is language? The way I was taught, very important. The things that you don't say could get somebody hurt, and we didn't say them because we thought it was obvious thing, and we shouldn't have to say them. But maybe those are the things that we need to really focus on and convey to our students, so they truly understand why they're doing what they're doing. And if they can understand why, well, then maybe they're more prone to actually start doing them. But again, how do you go about conveying that information, the stuff that you learned later on that wasn't said out loud, and how has that changed the way that you go about your practices, your teachings? Just another idea. Hopefully it helps. Thank you for joining me on another one of Nain Shorts. Before I go, again, March 16th, see Johnny Oliva at Twin Tiger Self-Defense Academy of Self-Defense. I keep doing that backwards. In Brentwood. So for a good cause, so please come if you can. If you can't, maybe you can do a donation. But thank you very much, and as usual, 3, 2, 1, cut!